Hi and welcome to Beans, Brews and Bread today. I'd like today to talk about trying to get your first allotment plot. Obviously quite a lot of the viewers that watch the channel have their own space to grow, but there's not everyone out there who's got an allotment plot or is thinking necessarily about getting plants in their own ground. I'd like to do a video today about what the things to think about and planning to put in place if you're looking to go and put your name down for your allotment plot. So let's have a look. Starting in the shed at home isn't perhaps such a bad idea, because whilst you might have hankerings to get your name down on an allotment plot and start growing straight away, the sad reality of sort of allotment plot provision in the UK is that there's really not a lot, and those that there are have massive waiting lists as people move on or they get evicted due to non-cultivation notices on their allotment plots. That's kind of mostly how plots get handed over or retire out of them. So probably the first thing to maybe suggest is thinking about, is there any space you can grow at home? You try and get an idea for the orientation of your garden. You might not be able to have your own soil to plant in if you've got a backyard or you're in a property that just doesn't have much access to soil, in which case you might want to think about container growing. Great way, just get it as sited in full sun as possible. And there's so much crops you can grow in containers: potatoes, carrots, everything really can be grown in containers. Provide a link below to a great channel which has got loads of great tips for container gardening. There's some great videos in there. Talks about, you know, how to fill your planters, what to fill them with, fertilizing, watering, loads of great tips. And that's a great channel to get some great ideas for container growing. Otherwise, if you've got just a general patch of grass or a lawn that's just, you know, normal garden, you can consider raised beds. You can consider just chopping a section out of the garden, just getting it set over to growing some crops. Again, just make sure it's not too shaded and it gets as much sunlight as possible. Grow quite a lot of produce in a very small space. Main considerations are sunlight and fertilizing and watering, and you'd be really surprised how much you can get away with at your own house. The advantage of growing at your own house is that it's literally outside your back door. You can look after the crops without having to travel. You can keep an eye on them. Neighbours, you know, can pop over and water them if you go away on holiday. So there's loads of great ideas and benefits to growing your own stuff in the house. There's nothing stopping you, if you do eventually get an allotment plot, turning your garden back over to your own leisure time and moving all your crops over to the plot. So don't overlook the idea of growing your own stuff at home first. Another advantage of being close to home is that you're quite close to a working kettle. It's a very important aspect of growing, to be able to have as much access and frequency to liquid refreshment as possible. So cheers. Main question for today is how to get your own allotment plot. So first thing to do is get on a list. Now, most council run allotment plots have pages on their websites for local government, whether that be a municipal council or a parish council. There should be some contact or provision online for allotment plots. You'll also, just in your own local area, probably have an idea as to where the plots are. Sometimes it's worth actually popping down at a weekend just to see if they've got an information board on the outside of the site, just in case it's got any details for the committee or the management of the site, if that's the best way to get in contact with them. But I know for certainly my council, there's actually a section on the council website dedicated to allotments and allotment sites, and that has the contact details of the committee members, at least at the time that the web page is updated, for who to get in contact with to put your name down. And what will normally happen is that your name will then just simply get put on a list. Now, there are some horror stories out there about people waiting 7-10 years to get through the list and finally get offered an allotment plot. Be interested to know, if anybody's watched the video today, how long it took you to get your allotment plot. Be interesting to see, you know, what you've done as well while you've been waiting for one. So just interesting. Put some comments down below and give us an idea. Other than that, your name gets put on a list, and that's simply a rolling list that shuffles up as one plot becomes empty. The list's scrutinised. The committee or management will contact the person at the top of the list and ask them if they're still interested. So I would suggest that first tip is probably put your name down on a couple of plot lists. Maybe give yourself an idea as which is the locality that you're prepared to travel to get to an allotment plot, whether by car or by foot if you're very lucky, and to put your name down on a few. The advantage of that is that you can put, you're not putting, so to speak, all your eggs in one basket. You're playing the numbers game a little bit. Just don't be shy about putting your name down on a few plot sites lists, simply because if you've already got a plot, just tell the management of the plot that's rung you up, say that I've got a plot, thanks very much, and your name's taken off and it goes to the next person. So if you've got your heart set on just one site, then, or there is only literally one site in your area, then you're a bit stuck. But if you're lucky enough to live in a bigger conurbation to have a few allotment sites, and I'd certainly recommend you put your name down on a few. At that point, another thing to think about is private sites. I have heard of some sites which are run by larger garden centres that have given over some of their commercial land over to allotment plots. They may be worthwhile if they may be on their websites, or just local knowledge. You'll know that they're the people that run that particular site. So that's one way of looking at it as well. Another option is charities or other public bodies which have land dedicated over to growing, and again, that's another thing to consider. So then, if you're lucky enough to have been phoned up and you've been offered a plot, then fingers crossed it's on the site that is your heart's desire, and that's the place that you want to grow your crops. One thing you might want to consider is maybe just doing the general allotment search by name, if you know the name of the site, just to check that that is a site for you. As with anything where there are communities and relationships to be built, there's also the possibility that relationships can sour. There have obviously been some rather dramatic stories of people getting bullied off sites and chased off or made to feel unwelcome, and sometimes these are in the local media, so it might be worthwhile just giving a quick search just to see if there have been any instances where people have had poor relations with the committee or other site members, and whether that's kind of made it to the local newspapers. It's thankfully very rare. People are, by general nature, being involved in gardening, quite a nice bunch of people and very friendly and welcoming. But it's just something to consider. If a site has a bad reputation, and then that sometimes does get through onto local media, and it might be something for you to consider as to whether or not you would be interested in taking that plot. But fingers crossed, you've been offered your plot. And the most important tip I'd ask you to take away from today, if you're thinking about taking on your own plot, is to think like Goldilocks. Because when they ring you up, they'll give you maybe a time that's convenient to you and them for the committee member to show you around the plot. And when you do go and meet them, is to think like Goldilocks. Is the plot too big? Is it something you won't be able to cope with? It's just far too big. Is it covered in the worst possible weeds and condition? Is it full of waste, plastic waste, rubble? Is it something that you're just not going to be able to take on just due to its condition? Because what you tend to find is that plots, when they're offered, are offered for the main reason that they've not been cultivated for a long time. And it just takes that right person to be able to roll their sleeves up, get down and get to it. But obviously, people are different. If that's not the kind of project that you're interested in, you've just got to bear in mind that what you're capable of and what would fit and suit you. Is the plot too small? As waiting lists get longer and people have ever more increased interest in growing crops or allotments, sites are increasingly fractioning up their plots. So it's not unheard of to have people offered half-size plots, quarter-size plots, which are just far too small. And really, compared to maybe being able to grow your own stuff at home in containers or in raised beds at home, it doesn't really necessarily make much sense unless you particularly want the allotment site for the sort of community aspect. You may feel, actually, it's really not worthwhile to travel here and get things set up when I could be growing the same amount of stuff at home. Fingers crossed, though, the plot that you've been offered won't be too big, won't be too small. It's not in an absolutely uncultivatable state, and it'll be just right for you. And then That's really when you have to start thinking about the practicalities. And you're happy to take, it's not just about the plot, it's about the site. So what's the access like to the site? Is it gated so that people can feel that they're secure in themselves and their equipment and crops on the site? Do you not just have general public access to the site? Is it prone to being waterlogged? Just have an idea, maybe get an idea, go down when it's raining. I know no one really wants to stand outside when it's raining, but it might not be such a bad idea to see what the site's like when it's raining, in case there's any water issues. Also, what weeds are there? Generally speaking, are you happy to start weeding out mare's tail, knotweed? You know, some of the really horrible, pernicious weeds there are. If the plot's absolutely covered in it, or the site generally has a problem with those kind of weeds, is that something that you're prepared to deal with and get cleared? Another thing is not just on the plot itself, but what's the access to water like on the site? So a lot of sites either don't have their own water supplies, and they'll obviously encourage you to have water collection as part of your tenancy. Some of them, however, do have standing pipes. So how far is your plot from those access points? Obviously, if you have to think about connecting 3 or 4 hoses together to be able to get water onto your plot, is that something that you're prepared and thinking about? Also, what's the plot condition like? If it's been uncultivated for a long time, that's something you've got to deal with and clear. On the other hand, you might be looking off that there's some crops that have been left. It's always worth checking with the committee, is there an agreement in place for the old tenant to take their crops away, or do you move on as seen, which means that in effect you're entitled to any crops that are already in the ground on the plot? Or do they need removing? Are there any trees that maybe the previous tenants that they're going to take? It's well worth asking these questions of the person who's taking you around, just to make sure that you know what to expect and you don't start taking something which somebody claims a right to. How far is the plot from the access point? Obviously, there's only so many access points on the site, but where's your plot in relation to them? Are you the very first plot as you walk in, or have you got to take a fairly decent walk along the entire length of the plot site to get to the one right at the end where there's no other access? All things to consider. Does the plot that you're on have any existing structures on it? Does it have a shed or a tool store that that comes with the plot, or is it something which the previous tenant's taken with them? In which case, when can you expect it to be gone by? And what plans you've got to put in place to get your own structures on the plot. Another thing to think about is any reason as to why the last person moved. As politely as possible. People have personal circumstances that probably shouldn't really be shared as to why you're leaving an allotment site. But again, it might just give you a bit of an indication as to what the community's like on the allotment site, and whether there's any sort of bad feeling or reasons as to why people may have moved on. I wouldn't press it too much, but I think perhaps it might be a sort of passing question you could think about asking. Other things to think about are if you decide to take a pass. So having gone through these questions and assessed the site, or you're not that keen on it, is a question is that if there is any other plots on that site that you might be interested in, is how long is the rest of the list? And if you do decide to pass on this particular plot, whether you will stay at the top of the list or whether you'll go right down back to the bottom again. A lot of sites have different rules as to how they approach waiting lists. Some will accept that it would be unreasonable for you to be offered a plot and then wait 7 years again to work your way back up to the top. But equally, they may well take the view that, well, you've been offered perfectly good land. Yes, it might be in a slightly weedy state, but it's for you to clear and make the best of as you can. If you don't take that opportunity, then you will have to go back to the bottom of the list. So that's worth asking. If you do decide to take the plot, obvious questions are, how much is the plot rent? Will it be paid on a monthly or a yearly basis? I think most of them are paid on a yearly basis, so it's something that you have to consider, that you're going to have to pay an aggregated amount every year in one lump sum. Are there any reductions for concessions? So due to your own personal circumstances, whether there may be a slightly reduced rate, always worth asking. Other questions, is the rent fixed? So is it likely to stay at that rate for a good couple of years, or will it be subject to review anytime soon? Because the council or the owner of the land will invariably think about rent increases over a periodic time, probably something anywhere between maybe 2-5 years maybe, and whether there's any review likely to come up. Other things are sort of bylaws or rules. Normally anything no bigger than a shed is normally fine. They may, however, stipulate that if you were to put any sort of standing structures for support, it doesn't go over a certain height. There may be rules about the rooting stock on fruit trees such as apples and pears that they may require that you keep to, because they don't want massive rootstock trees on the site if you leave, and it's an absolute pain to pay somebody to take down. So that's always worth asking. So you're lucky enough to have been offered a plot, and it's your Goldilocks plot on your preferred site with perfect distance from the access point and the tap, and it looks like there's a couple of crops in the ground that you might be able to snaffle because the previous tenant has left in good terms, just simply because they've moved out of the area, and you like the look of the site and the committee. And then it's all about the fun stuff, the planning. You might have a small waiting period before you might be able to get on because the previous tenant hasn't cleared some fruit bushes or something which they're wanting to take with them. So if you do have a bit of a breather, this is all the anticipation and the fun starts, where you can think about planning. But some ideas you might want to for sort of planning on your first plot. A great tip that was on Green Side Up was doing a Google Earth search of the allotment site and see if you can locate your plot. He did a great series of videos on your first allotment plot. I'll provide a link to the 3 videos or so that he did a few years ago on the subject. But his tip was to do a Google Earth search of the site and see if you can really drill down onto where your plot is. And it's also, you can actually switch between years and when the picture was taken, so you can kind of get an idea as to what's been grown during the seasons. But the advantage of Google Earth is that you can actually plot with a ruler the distance the plot takes up, and also where there's any sheds or structures. So you can kind of take those measurements, and you can just get a pen and paper and just draw out to scale what the plot size is, and where there's any paths or demarcations between the beds and the like. You can get planning. So are there any existing beds that you're going to keep? You're going to keep with that plan, and you're just going to put different crops in? Or have you got to completely clear the ground and start from scratch, and this is the first time anyone for a very long time will have been putting a detailed plan in action to grow crops? What are you going to go for? Are you going to go for raised beds? Are you just going to go for normal sort of traditional earthed up beds with wood bark paths in between? How are you going to plan out your plot? Where's the shady areas? Where's the areas that might get the best sun? New structures, where are they going to go? Where are you going to site your compost bins? If you're going to go try and compost on site, the possibilities are endless, and that's what the fun is really. Is trying to, once you've got your plot, you might have that small breathing period as to what you might want to put in the ground and how you want to get your plot set up. A little patio area for putting a chair and a little table. Are you going to be able to get some refreshment facilities? Sometimes sites actually have a big shed on site for communal use where you can make your own brew, or are you going to take a small camper stove into your shed and brew your own tea? Possibilities are endless. But that's just the fun of it. So I hope you've enjoyed some of the thoughts today. I hope it might inspire you to, even if you're going to be stuck on a waiting list for a while, is to maybe think about growing at home, some planters, or maybe turn over a corner of your own garden to growing your own crops. And if you do get lucky enough to get off the plot site, might give you a few pointers and a few ideas and a few tips as to what to look out for, what to ask, and what to expect as well out of the allotment site. And I hope it's enthused you and you've got some great ideas. If you've liked what you've seen today, then we'd be grateful if you give it a thumbs up. If you've got any comments or suggestions yourself, or maybe if you've got any tips that we've not covered today but you've got personal experience of, write them down in the comments below. If you'd like to get notified of the next time there's a video on the channel, then please do press the subscribe button and the bell icon as well, because that should hopefully give you a definite ping when the next video goes out. Also, maybe if you want to have a look at some of the other stuff on the channel, if you're interested in brewing beer or fermentation, I've got a series there on brewing on the stove, brew in the bag, and also managed to get the first bread recipe video done the other week. If you'd like to think about making a tinned loaf this weekend, then just go onto the channel and it'll be there under the playlist for bread recipes. So thanks for watching along today. See you next time. Bye.